My name is Jim, and I am an alcoholic.
Hi, Jim.
Hi, everybody. Glad you're here. This meeting is an hour and a half in length, and we take a 10-minute break at the halfway point. Please join me in a moment of silent meditation, and we'll say the Serenity Prayer together. Thank you. Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. And all together now, Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other. They may solve their common problem and help others recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting to our own contributions. And AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution. Does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety. You know, it's kind of a shame. I can remember when we first got this group started, we'd have a room full, and that would resound all around the room, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Standing room only?
Some fellow was in here earlier putting about half the chairs away, and I was about to stop him, but now I realize he knew what he was doing. Okay, who would like to read chapter 5, how it works?
I got it.
Go ahead.
My name is George, and I'm an alcoholic. George, chapter 5, how it works. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. Usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. There are such unfortunates. They are not at fault. They seem to have been born that way. They are naturally incapable of grasping and developing a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. Their chances are less than average. There are those, too, who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders, but many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. Our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like and what happened and what we are like now. You've decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you are ready to take certain steps. At some of these we thought we could find an easier, softer way, but we could not. With all the earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go absolutely. Remember that we deal with alcohol, cunning, baffling, powerful. Without help it is too much for us, but there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. Half measures availed us nothing. We stood at the turning point. We asked his protection and care with complete abandon. Here are the steps we took which are suggested as a program of recovery. 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood it. 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. 7, humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. 8, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. 10, continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. 12, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Many of us exclaim, "What, in order? I can't go through with it." Do not be discouraged. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. We are not saints. The point is that we're willing to grow along spiritual lines. The principles we have set down are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. Our description of the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after make clear 3 pertinent ideas. A, that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives. B, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. C, that God could would leave us.
Thanks very much. Okay, we're in chapter 8, chapter to wives. We're about to finish up with chapter 8 today, I think. We've reached a point in the chapter, open your books to page 120, please, where the wife is now being advised as to how she should deal with her husband who is in recovery. Remember, the first part of the chapter dealt with how to deal with the husband who was still drinking. And now the advice here is to how to get along with this guy when he's trying to recover. And of course, again, the emphasis here is on the wife and her best interests. But in the process of doing that, the big book also has to zero in on us. And we have a lot of first step material in chapter 8. It's a critical chapter, by the way. If you're sponsoring people, or if you're just new, you need to read this chapter carefully, because it's going to fill in a lot of gaps in your knowledge about the disease and about yourself and how you have reacted and what's happened to you. This chapter also demonstrates that there was a substantial concern and emphasis in the days when the big book was being written about the family and all the members in the family, because they were a part of the fellowship in those days, and it was clear that they needed help as well. And so the big book spends 2 chapters emphasizing not just the alcoholic, but the families of the alcoholic and those who are near and dear to the alcoholic. And today, unfortunately, we don't seem to have a great deal of concern about that, although we ought to. At our meeting last night at the 101 Club, the Stairway group, we had several family groups there. And it felt good, because those folks were hearing some things for the first time that they had never heard before, and they got a little clearer picture of what was going on with the alcoholic in their family. In any event, this last couple of pages of chapter 8, remember, is focusing on the wife who has a recovering husband. Top of page 120, first full paragraph, 6 lines down from the top. Perhaps your husband will make a fair start on the new basis, but just as things are going beautifully, he dismays you by coming home drunk. If you're satisfied he really wants to get over drinking, you need not be alarmed. Well, that's a real important statement, because this business of want to is something which the big book emphasizes a lot, and we need to take it literally, that this business of wanting it is really basic to recovery. As a matter of fact, if you remember when we were studying the 7th chapter, the rule stated in the 7th chapter is that if he is to find God, the desire must come from within. And so, again, the wife here is being advised that if he truly wants to get over drinking, if he's got the desire to do so, remember, the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. You don't have to be alarmed. though it is infinitely better that he have no relapse at all, as has been true with many of our men, it is by no means a bad thing in some cases. And I think we went over this last week, but it bears repeating. We have to be real careful in our groups, in our meetings, because there's so much slipping and sliding around going on these days. And people with multiple experiences in treatment centers and so forth, that it's easy for a new person to get the idea that a relapse is a part of recovery. I've heard that said. How many times do I have to relapse before I'll finally get it? And we should never, ever be sanguine about relapsing, slipping. Many times that's the death knell for the slipper. And never, ever is it necessary. That's the message we need to carry. It happens because the person who slips either was not willing to do the work or was badly instructed or sponsored from the beginning, which happens a lot, or tended or wanted to believe the human solutions emanating from various outside sources rather than accept what we have to offer, which is purely and simply a spiritual solution to a spiritual problem. And so it's important that the newcomer not be given the idea that the relapse or slip is a natural and normal part of recovery. That's not true. Your husband will see at once he must redouble his spiritual activities if he expects to survive. I was talking with a friend about this before the meeting. There's no sitting still, no standing still in terms of spiritual fitness, because spiritual fitness and spiritual growth are the same thing. That if we are not growing spiritually, we're going backwards. There's no way to stand still. Some churches seem to give us the idea that once we have followed through on certain protocols and done certain things, that after that it's all okay, and that we just then have to, kind of live a decent life. But here we know that spiritual fitness is the only thing that will save us. And spiritual fitness comes only after we have done those things necessary to grow spiritually. Take a look at the 11th step. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact. Take a look at the rule we find on page 85, which tells us that that all we have is a daily reprieve, and it's conditioned upon our remaining spiritually fit. And that every day is a day when we must carry a vision of God's will for us into all our activities. What's the 12th step say? Practice these principles in all my affairs. There's no sitting still here. Sitting still is the death knell for us. And so when it says here that your husband will see at once he must redouble his spiritual activities if he expects to survive, that doesn't say anything about making more coffee or cleaning more ashtrays or going to more baseball games or picnics. It has nothing to do with any of that. His recovery, to avoid that next relapse, that next slip, he must redouble his spiritual activities. And this is the rule for all of us. You need not remind him of his spiritual deficiency. He will know of it. Cheer him up and ask him how you can be still more helpful. And that's a great rule for all of us. In my office, most of the people in my office are in recovery. And we make it a habit when we are with each other to ask, what can I do to help you? The other thing we ask is, if anybody told you they love you today? And you know what? It's a great thing because we mean it. What can I do to help you? One of the greatest things we can do when we are trying to do amends is to end our amends with, what can I do to help you? What can I do to help you? It is the way to end an amends. Cheer him up and ask him how you can be still more helpful. The advice to the wife here is something that applies to us right across the board. That's why I keep kind of harping on this idea that the 8th and 9th chapters, though addressed to wives and families, are must reading for us, because all the way through these chapters we find material that relates directly to us. And then it goes on to say this: the slightest sign of fear or intolerance may lessen your husband's chance of recovery. In a weak moment, he may take your dislike of his high-stepping friends as one of those insanely trivial excuses to drink. Now, what is it that we learn for ourselves? That love and tolerance is our code. There's no difference here. The wife is being told the same thing. And some people who have suffered mightily with the drunks in their family have said to me, what is this business? We got to coddle this guy? No, it doesn't say coddle him. It doesn't say wrap him up in cotton wool. It says act toward him with patience and love and tolerance. And stay out of arguments and blaming and the catechism of his sins, which is what has been happening in the past. Sure, you got it all written down. Sure, it's burned into your forehead. So what? If you want this man to recover, if you want this woman to recover, you got to play your part too. And a big part of what has to happen here is something that we see every single day. A lot of you people have been doing a lot of 12-step work for a long time, so you know what I'm talking about. You get somebody and they're working along real good, and then someone comes into their life who demands their time and attention and distracts them from what they need to be doing. And you see that distraction and you know what's going to happen, and you struggle against it. You try to keep them squared away, but no. They get distracted, and pretty soon their program falls apart, and they're back out again. So the lesson here to the wife is simple. Let this man do what he has to do. And if you do that, and if you have patience, it'll work itself out, and it always does. The problem that we have, just a minute, David, please. The problem we have is that we are schooled, and we've come to believe so clearly that we are entitled, that we're justified in our anger, in our impatience. Look at what we've had to put up with. This chapter is saying, put that aside. If you truly want to be helpful, get out of the way and let this program and God have their way with your man. Yes, David.
My name is David. I'm an alcoholic. I was just wondering about this term high-stepping friends. What the term high-stepping in 1939, what does that mean? I mean,
that's an old term. David, you're much too young a man. You wouldn't remember that term being used.
Right.
But high-stepping friends, that means people, it refers to some of the dances of the day. It refers to people who live the high life or the fast life. Today we might call them jet setters, or we might call them party people. And here they're called high stepping. But that's what means the same thing. Going on then on page 120.
Jim, got a question there.
Yes, sir.
This chapter, mine's Lewis and Ronald.
Yeah, Bruce.
This chapter is entitled "To the Wives," but this would also be applicable to.
You better say it again. I'm not sure I understood you.
Children, boyfriends, girlfriends. Would you say?
Oh, she said accept those things?
No, I'm saying, would you say that a lot of us aren't wives, but we have other significant relationships in our lives, with people who are still using.
Yes.
Or who still, have the alcoholic mind, per se.
Yes.
So this chapter would be interchangeable, I would say, as a question. Wives meaning other significant relationships, parents, other people who are still whirling dervishes.
They're absolutely right. This applies across the board. Everybody who is significant in your life is being spoken to here. And if you give them a copy of this book to read, you remind them the chapter to wives is a universal appeal to people who are close to you. Because the rules apply across the board. That's a good point. Thank you.
So the drunk could be the wife, the drunk could be the wife, the drunk could be the kid.
Yes.
Or the wife could be the kid of the alcoholic.
Yes, absolutely. Now, remember, when this was written in 1939, the emphasis was on wives simply because substantially all of the men in the fellowship at that time were married. And the wives and the husbands and wives met together. The wives were as much a part of the fellowship at that time as the husbands were. And remember, we read so much about that in this chapter and how they came to understand that they needed to work the steps right along with their husbands, that they had the same defects of character as their husbands had. So the emphasis here on wives was reflective of the day, of the customs, of the realities of 1939. Today it hardly applies at all. But that doesn't mean that because the families aren't around, that it doesn't apply to the rest of the people who are important in our lives, because it does. That's a good point. Next paragraph, last one on page 120. Yeah. We never try to arrange a man's life so as to shield him from temptation. The slightest disposition on your part to guide his appointments or his affairs so he will not be tempted will be noticed. Make him feel absolutely free to come and go as he likes. This is important. Now, we've read this before, haven't we? So let's go back, though, and remind ourselves where this comes from. Look at page 101. (101). Second full paragraph, beginning right in the middle of the page. In our belief, any scheme of combating alcoholism which proposes to shield the sick man from temptation is doomed to failure. If the alcoholic tries to shield himself, he may succeed for a time, but he usually winds up with a bigger explosion than ever. We have tried these methods. These attempts to do the impossible have always failed. So you see, everything in this big book is consistent with everything else. It's the only book I've ever read where I could find no inconsistencies. And so this is simply following along what we've already learned. These attempts to shield us, or us shielding ourselves from temptation, will not work. And why? Let's go back to basics. We always have to do this. The basic fact is that you and I have a disease which is incurable and deadly and progressive. And if we do not stop drinking, we will die, inevitably. The problem is that we can't stop drinking. And so in AA we are taught how to have victory over alcohol, and that has to come through the intervention of a higher power. In other words, our whole emphasis in working our steps here is to put God squarely between us and the booze. Now, when that is done, temptation is irrelevant, isn't it? On the other hand, the emphasis on avoiding temptation, which is the human solution stuff, doesn't work at all. When our sick mind, our alcoholic mind, says drink, we say yes sir, and we drink. Because we don't have the power to say no sir. If we can say no sir, we don't need to be in AA. If we can, on our own willpower, not drink, we don't need AA. It might be nice to be here, but we don't need it. A real alcoholic can't say no. Same way with these drug, you remember that drug campaign, Just Say No? Well, some of you people have had vast experience with drugs, and you know that's a damn joke. Total joke. Just say no. Huh. And so you see, what we're looking at here is a continuation here into the wives chapter of everything that we know from before. It is useless, it is counterproductive, and it is dangerous to suggest that the solution to alcoholism is to avoid temptation. It just does not work. It's a false premise. It's a false trail. And people get drunk all the time trying to follow these false trails. This is important. If he gets drunk, don't blame yourself. Now here's another rule, and this applies to us, and it applies to us both individually and as sponsors. God has either removed your husband's liquor problem or he has not. It doesn't say anything about your husband suddenly got his willpower back. Because the answer is always the same for each and every one of us. God has either removed your husband's liquor problem or he has not. If not, it had better be found out right away. Then you and your husband can get right down to fundamentals. If a repetition is to be prevented, place the problem, along with everything else, in God's hands. That's consistent with everything else we know in this, and everything else that we find in this book. We just read it in chapter 5. Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. And over and over and over again. Half measures availed us nothing. The results are nil until we let go absolutely. In the third step, we found we had to quit playing God. Why? Because it didn't work. And therefore, we decided that hereafter in this drama of life, God was going to be the director. He is the principal. We are the agent. He is the father. We are the child. These are all absolutes, you see. They are all categorical imperatives. There are no weasel words in the big book. None whatsoever. Does not involve itself in comparative logic of any kind. Simply says, this is what we do. This is what we did, and this is what you must do if you want to follow our path. Page 121, top of the page. We realize we've been giving you much direction and advice. We may have seemed to lecture. If that's so, we're sorry. For we ourselves don't always care for people who lecture us, but what we have related is based upon experience. Please, this is the key to everything you read in the big book. This book is history. It comes from experience. It does not come from philosophy. It does not come from opinion. It's not something that was made up. Everything you read here comes directly out of the experience of those who wrote the book. What we have related is based upon experience, some of it painful. We had to learn these things the hard way. That's why we are anxious that you understand and that you avoid these unnecessary difficulties. So to you out there who may soon be with us, we say, good luck and God bless you. Okie dokie. What we're going to do is we're going to pay the rent now, and we'll take a 10-minute break. And when we come back, we'll start on chapter 9. 22, please.
Yeah, I think she'll be back next week. Thank you.
So we're now going to be studying the 9th chapter, the family afterward. Again, this chapter is tremendously important. It's a must-read for newcomers. It's a must-read for all of us. It contains a whole lot of first-step material, but it also is a chapter which emphasizes something which somehow doesn't get much emphasis anymore these days. It emphasizes that we in the fellowship do not have a monopoly on the 12 steps, that there's no patent on them, that they're not our exclusive property, but that in fact the 12 steps are applicable and usable by every human being. I guess we can't really say it too many times. The 12 steps are spiritual principles which have come down from forever, as far back as anyone can trace. I think I'm not sure whether it was this group or not, but in doing a little research, I found that the 12 steps fall directly within the writings of the old Gnostics and Stephen the Apostle. By the way, those writings were banned for centuries as being heretical. And yet, when if we read the book of James, we find all of the steps not necessarily buried in James. They're pretty obvious there. But it goes way before that time. In doing the work for the 12 steps for Christians, I spent a lot of time researching the Old Testament. And over half of the biblical passages which support the steps come from the Old Testament. Many from Proverbs and from Psalms. I even found tremendous support for the steps in the one of the minor prophets. Help me out here. It starts with an M. Anybody remember their Old Testament enough to tell me? It'll come to me. In any event, here's what he said, and it's so perfect for us. He said that the people had come to him and asked him, "What does God expect of us?" And in those days, they believed that God expected sacrifice. Sacrificing lambs and goats and skins of oil, olive oil. That sacrifice was the only way to propitiate the gods. And this prophet said no. He said, what God expects of you is that you be just, that you practice mercy, and that you walk humbly with your God. It's exactly what we teach here. This whole business of walking humbly with your God, if you think about the AA program, you find that it permeates everything we do. Bill was a complete bug about humility. In fact, if you have language of the heart, you know that he wrote a 7 or 8 page article on humility and being humble. And the emphasis in the 12 traditions is all on humility. It's all on self-sacrifice and humility. When you study the traditions and you study the material that supports them and all the stuff that Bill wrote, and after the traditions were being considered for adoption, it all centers around humility and self-sacrifice. Not one word of the traditions has anything at all to do with fear. Least of all the fear of discovery. If you take the 12th tradition, which people now use as an excuse for strict anonymity even in the rooms, and that you're not supposed to ever say anything about what you see here and all that stuff. That's not what the 12th tradition stands for at all. The 12th tradition is presaged by the foreword of the first edition, where we are told that in public we are to forego the use of our last name. That's what anonymity means, and it does not mean that we do not reveal our last names among ourselves. In fact, if you stop and think about it, that's about as dumb as anything you can get. How many times have you known that somebody was in the hospital, you went down to the hospital to see him, and you say, is Susie there? Susie who? I don't know.
Good friend of mine.
You lose their phone number. How the hell are you going to look them up in the phone book? You don't know their last name. And yet it's so ingrained in us, and people have the idea that we do that so that we can't get ratted out, so that nobody is going to tell on us that we are drunks. And that's exactly why in every other club except this one, and God bless you people here, this is the wisest club in South Florida. Every other club, if you look at their meeting board, it's one meeting after another that's closed. You notice the only closed meetings here are men's meetings? It's a good idea to close those rascals down, I tell you what. It's a great place to use the F word and not be criticized. But in any event, when we look at this business of humility, then we're looking at one of the backbones of recovery. The whole essay that Bill built around the 7th step in the 12 and 12 illustrates his sense of the importance of humility. And so when the prophet said, what God expects of you is that you be just, that you practice mercy, and that you walk humbly with your God, he was speaking for us. And so when we look at the steps, we have to remember that we've got something here which is of priceless value, but it does not belong to us. And we don't go around clutching it to our bosom and saying, this is only for acknowledged alcoholics, and every once in a while somebody who's an addict might be entitled to use it. The rest of these 12-step groups we don't even recognize. And of course, in most cases, you wouldn't recognize the steps they practice anyway, because it's all been so bastardized by people rewriting them to their own specifications that it's very difficult to recognize them as the 12 steps that were revealed to Bill Wilson. But this chapter, and it's a long way of getting around to it, but this chapter is based on the idea, the belief, that the whole family ought to be involved in spiritual recovery. It's a plea for that. The concept here is so clear that if the members of the family, including the alcoholic, are deeply immersed in the spiritual recovery of their own, that the results will be much faster and more sure recovery of the alcoholic. But even beyond that, it indicates a strong concern about the family and what has happened to them as a result of being cooped up with an alcoholic all this time. There's a well, I don't find it now, but it'll come. Okay, the point here is that this chapter is bottomed upon this concept that the family grows spiritually together. Now, if you take that back to what we learned in chapter 7 about what sponsorship is, sponsorship being both you and the new man must walk day by day in the path of spiritual progress. And over again, the plea is clear in this chapter. Everybody, get on board this spiritual recovery. Stay with it. And much is made of the fact that the family that grows spiritually together stays together, grows together, and the alcoholic in the family has much greater chance of success. And so as we read this, remember the background that this comes from. And remember that though it does not seem to be all that important today, especially in South Florida or places like this where the family seems so fragmented and there's so many people here who do not have their families near, so many transients. This is not like a little town in Ohio or a bigger city also in Ohio, or even downtown Manhattan, because Manhattan in those days wasn't such a mess as it is now. There was still a lot of closeness there, and there were neighborhoods, and people had families, and the families lived in the same neighborhoods, and it was a different scene entirely. Nevertheless, the rule is the same, and the concept is the same, and every once in a while there will be a family which absolutely needs this, and without this, the family that does not have this will be running in almost every instance at cross purposes to recovery of the alcoholic. And see, that's where the real danger lies. Because the alcoholic who's trying to recover in spite of the lack of understanding, the lack of cooperation from his or her family, has a much tougher road to hoe. Very difficult. So let's see what this says on page 122. Our women folk have suggested certain attitudes a wife may take with the husband who is recovering. Perhaps they created the impression that he is to be wrapped in cotton wool and placed on a pedestal. Successful readjustment means the opposite. All members of the family should meet upon the common ground of tolerance, understanding, and love, which is exactly what the big book says we must do. Remember, right at the 10th step, love and tolerance of others is our code. It's not a nice thing to do, it's code. It is a must. It is the way we must live our lives. But notice what it's saying here. All members of the family should meet upon the common ground of tolerance, understanding, and love. This involves a process of deflation. Now, this isn't talking about just the deflation of the alcoholic. We know we have to go through that. It's talking about a deflation across the board in the whole family. The alcoholic, his wife, his children, his in-laws, each one is likely to have fixed ideas about the family's attitude toward himself or herself. Each is interested in having his or her wishes respected. We find the more one member of the family demands that the others concede to him, the more resentful they become. This makes for discord and unhappiness. Heck, you could build a whole psych course for a semester around that one sentence, couldn't you? You see how profound this book is? Bill's insight was absolutely enormous, astounding, of what he saw and how cogently and in compact form he could present it to us. Think about this. One member of the family demands that the others concede to him, the more resentful they become. This makes for discord and unhappiness. It sounds like that ought to be common knowledge. Everybody should know that. And yet, when we place it in this particular context, it becomes really critical, doesn't it? Because here we have a family which has been torn apart by the tornado we call the alcoholic, roaring through their lives perhaps for years and years. Everybody has been hurt. Everybody is suspicious. Everybody feels a sense of martyrdom. Everybody feels a sense of entitlement. I hate that word, entitlement, and yet it seems to define what we're talking about here. I wonder, digressing for a moment, how do we become entitled simply by being? Don't we become entitled by doing something? Maybe that isn't politically correct. In any event, we're looking here at a situation which is across the board a tough one. Now, how do we go about solving this almost inevitable problem of the way the family will think? The way that what they bring to this relationship where recovery is now in progress for the drunk? Well, let's go on and see here. What's happened here and why does this happen? And why? Is it not because each wants to play the lead? Is not each trying to arrange the family show to his liking? Is he not unconsciously trying to see what he can take from the family life rather than give? Boy, that sounds like something we read in the wives' story. Let's go back to page 118, 116, 116. The second full paragraph, 4 lines down from the beginning of that paragraph. We wives found that like everybody else, we were afflicted with pride, self-pity, vanity, and all the things which go to make up the self-centered person. And we were not above selfishness or dishonesty. As our husbands began to apply spiritual principles in their lives, we began to see the desirability of doing so too. You see that that's entirely consistent with what we just read. Is not each trying to arrange the family show to his liking? Is he not unconsciously trying to see what he can take from the family life rather than give? And so that sets the stage here. The big book is always consistent this way too, guys. It always first states the problem, and then immediately thereafter gives a solution. And so now we're going to begin to get the solution. A family that's been at war, got a recovering alcoholic in their midst now. Old habits die hard. Old wants, needs, and desires, old selfish aims, old jealousies, old hurts, they die hard, they're still there. Well, what are we going to do about that? Well, cessation of drinking is but the first step away from a highly strained abnormal condition. That's so important to understand. Because, you know, it doesn't even sound like what we hear around these rooms these days. Well, did you drink today? No. Well, then you had a good day. I did? I'm not the least bit sure of that. Cessation of drinking is but the first step away from a highly strained abnormal condition. That's us. That's what it's talking about. Just to stop drinking is only the start to get away from a highly strained abnormal condition of mind and body, not to speak of our spiritual bankruptcy. The doctor said, years of living with an alcoholic is almost sure to make any wife or child neurotic. The entire family is, to some extent, ill. Well, if that's true, and it certainly seems to be, then how are we going to deal with this illness? And is it not something which ought to be an immediate concern of ours? Is it enough for us to just complain about the family and how rotten and stinking they still are, even though we're struggling here to recover? Don't they understand what we're going through? This is the same old stuff I had to put up with what I'm drinking, when I was drinking. Well, we have that responsibility. Remember what the Big Book has told us, that our job is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. That our job is to let God work within our lives so that we can be an example to the people we want to help of His power and His love and His way of life working in and through us, so that the major factor in the recovery of our families may very well center around us. And that's our responsibility. We can't duck out from that. Going on, let families realize as they start their journey that all will not be fair weather. Each in his turn may be sore and may struggle. There will be alluring shortcuts and bypaths down which they may wander and lose their way. Suppose we tell you some of the obstacles the family will meet. Suppose we suggest how they may be avoided, even converted to good use for others. See what the Big Book's doing here? It's setting it up. It's setting up the problem, because thereafter it's going to offer the solution. Now, if you look at it from that standpoint, then it all begins to make sense. Whatever we find here is going to relate to the solution to this problem which we're facing right now. The family of an alcoholic longs for the return of happiness and security. They remember when Father was romantic, thoughtful, and successful. Today's life is measured against that of other years, and when it falls short, the family may be unhappy. Family confidence in Dad is rising high. The good old days will soon be back, they think. Sometimes they demand that Dad bring them back instantly. God, they believe, almost owes this recompense on a long overdue account. But the head of the house has spent years in pulling down the structures of business, romance, friendship, health. These things are now ruined or damaged. It will take time to clear away the wreck. Though old buildings will eventually be replaced by finer ones, the new structures will take years to complete. Father knows he is to blame. It may take him many seasons of hard work to be restored financially, but he shouldn't be reproached. Perhaps he will never have much money again, but the wise family will admire him for what he is trying to be rather than for what he is trying to get. Wow, listen to that. Isn't that something? To be admired for what you're trying to be rather than for what you're trying to get. And that really restates the way we live our lives, or should. I'm going to do whatever's in front of me to be done today. I'm going to do the next right thing as it presents itself. I'm not going to harm another person. And I'm going to leave the results up to God. And however it turns out, that's His will for me. And I don't have any control over those results. But I most assuredly have control over my actions. You see, one of the great mistakes so many people make when they first come in here is thinking that powerlessness means powerlessness over actions. It does not. We'd love to think we had a great excuse for all the crapped out actions we took. And the human solutionists already have told us that over and over and over again. No wonder you did those things. Look what was done to you. Look what has happened with your unbalanced this and that. Besides, you're nuts. And so you're not responsible for your actions. That's balderdash. We took actions that we knew were wrong right from the get-go, and we did it anyway. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Lisa. I'm an alcoholic. I just wanted to share on what you're talking about. I'm sorry I was so late. I came because I knew you'd be talking about this.
Yes, ma'am.
And I just had this situation this morning. I live at home, and I've been there for a year. I just recently got my license back after 19 months. And
You got your license back for?
from a DUI.
Oh, okay. You're driving again.
Driving again.
All right, good.
Yeah. I'm not driving my car, driving my parents when they let me. And basically I'm only allowed to go to like work and meetings and things like that. Anyways, this morning I got up early and got ready and then decided I was going to go to a meeting in the other side of town. And when I came downstairs, I realized that my parents had already left, and my mom, they usually go to church on Sundays. And I had a decision I had to make. My parents just got a brand new car that's been in the garage. And when I looked outside, they didn't take the brand new car, they took the other car. And, you know, I'd like to think that lately I've been feeling like I've been doing so good with my program, and, you know, even though my parents don't really support it, you know, I know that this is what I need to do. And so I convinced myself that it was okay as long as I left a message on her cell phone and I wrote a note saying that I tried to get other rides to go ahead and take the car and go to this meeting because that's what I needed to do for my sobriety. And sure enough, when I was leaving to come home from the meeting, my phone rang, and it was my mom, and they're like, get home right now with the car, you know, how could you do this? And I guess I just need to share this because I struggle a lot, you know. I don't have the family that you describe in here. They don't want to change, and that's okay. You know, I have to be grateful for the fact that they allow me to have a place to live so that I can change. And sometimes it gets really frustrating because, you know, they don't see my growth. You know, I don't think they even realize it's so much more than just not drinking. And so when I got home, we had a big argument, and you know, basically I knew I was going to get in trouble, and it was sort of like I justified making that decision because I said, well, I need to do this for my sobriety. And I guess I think I already know that I didn't have the right intentions, but I needed to ask, I mean, I don't want to use the program as an excuse for my actions. And I know the best thing to do would have been to just wait till they got home and then gone to a different meeting. But, you know, once again, my ego was, I want to go to this certain meeting and I'm going to get there no matter what. And, you know, listening to what you're sharing, I guess I realized that I was wrong. And, you know, it's just, even when you don't mean to, sometimes your ego and yourself just, like, gets in the way.
So did you answer your own question?
Yeah, I was wrong.
I thought so. Well, in that case, we won't have to elaborate on it because you knew the right thing to do was to let them know, make sure that it was okay to take the car before you took it, and you decided that you weren't going to do that. And that it doesn't make you a bad girl. It just means it's another thing that we get to learn about ourselves. That a lot of the old actions, the old thinking hangs around. And we have to be aware of it. But the most important thing to remember is that decisions based on self are what got you in trouble in the first place. And so every time you can identify a decision based on self, stop right there and think about it. The big book gives you the answer. As long as you do what you believe God would have you do, you're going to be okay. But you got to leave the results up to Him. Now, if you did that and the results were your family got all over you, well, that's the results probably you had coming. But it doesn't really have anything to do with whether they recognize the parameters of recovery. They either do or they don't. Your program doesn't depend on that. Your recovery does not depend on that at all. And so you answered your own question, and I'm glad you brought it up, because these are the kinds of things which we all face, and we need to be able to be self-aware, and we especially need to be honest with ourselves about motivations, about attitudes and actions that we take. And if we do something that gets us in hot water, let's think back and see where we could have done differently. Because ultimately that's where it all comes back to. It isn't up to them. It's only up to us. You can say to yourself, if it's to be, it's up to me. And between you and God, and hopefully you've got a real good sponsor, you're going to get a lot done. And you'll be just fine. In spite of all these things that happen, because you stop and think about where you were before, that's nothing but a speed bump on the parking lot of life. You get those every once in a while. Some you can go around, some you slow down for, some you can avoid altogether, but they're still going to be there. That's an excellent illustration of the kinds of things that we need to be aware of as we grow up emotionally and spiritually. Remembering that we are responsible for our own actions, and that we are not powerless over our actions. And that was the main point. Because, if you take the statement at the beginning of the 4th chapter on some literal basis, that lack of power, that was our dilemma, that we have to, if we were to live, we have to find a power greater than ourselves. And that's what this book is all about, to find this greater power. But the idea that somehow our lack of power translates into lack of power over our actions is where we get in trouble. That it really means lack of power over our thinking, not over our actions. And the other thing that we come to learn in here, and it's almost paradoxical, is that thought follows action. When you take right action, you get right thinking. People want to argue about that all the time, but it's the truth. You take right action, and you get right thinking. It's not the other way around. And so, when we look at the things every night, you've been sober a year now?
18 months.
Well, then you're working your 11th step every night, right?
I had a slow start. I'm back at
Oh.
the beginning.
Well, on page 86, there are 10 questions you should be answering every night. You do that, and you'll see where you've fallen short, and you can make corrections with God's help. That's why we do that. We stay up with our present reality as we go. And that way, nothing ever can sneak up on us. If we don't do that, we're getting blindsided all the time. You'll be able to come to terms with your parents very simply if you're writing about them, because it'll become quite clear to you what your place is and what you must do for yourself. Anyway, I didn't mean to pick on you.
No, I mean, the thing that made me, I did all the old behavior, I knew I was wrong, and when I got called on the carpet, it was well, I could have just not written you a note and not called and just snuck the car back and blah, blah, blah. And it's I tried the martyr thing, I tried the self-pity thing, I tried the you don't know how bad my life is thing, you don't understand how good I'm doing thing. And you know what, the bottom line was it was all bullshit. I was wrong, and I should have just said my behavior was wrong, and I'm not going to do that again.
Okay, good. Now, let's not think in terms of right and wrong. Let's think in terms of right and wrong action. Because that's the difference. You stop doing the stuff that didn't work, and you start doing what will work, your whole life will change. But in order to find out what didn't work, we have to look at the results, don't we? So really it comes down to everything in this program, it revolves around the actions you take, not what's stuck in your head. Attitudes don't mean anything here. What counts is what you do. Everything in the steps has to do with the actions you take. So if you see that what you're doing isn't working, find out what it is that you're doing that's not working, and then change your actions. And you can do that. You get a good sponsor who will help you figure that stuff out and show you where to change your actions, if you don't have one already. Okie dokie. Who else has anything they'd like to share along these lines? Anyone? All right. Then, let's go down to the bottom, page 123. Now and then the family will be plagued by specters from the past, where the drinking career of almost every alcoholic has been marked by escapades, funny, humorous, shameful, or tragic. The first impulse will be to bury these skeletons in a dark closet and padlock the door. The family may be possessed by the idea that future happiness can be based only upon forgetfulness of the past. We think that such a view is self-centered and in direct conflict with the new way of living. Well, that's a big amen to that. Why would that be in direct conflict with our new way of living? Let's think about it. If I'm to change my life, isn't it necessary that I first find out what went wrong? If I'm going to change my life, I'm going to change the way I act. I'm going to start doing and living a different way of life, aren't I? In order for me to know what needs to be changed, I'm going to have to go back and look very closely. That's what we do in our fourth and fifth step. We examine every twist of character, every dark cranny of the past. Not to make us bad people, not to indict us, but to find out what went wrong. Find out what we have to change, and find out what we need to change but can't because we're powerless over it, where we need God's help. And that accounts for all of our defects of character. We can't change those ourselves. We need God's help with that. But in doing our inventory, we find out what these things are, and we can't bury them. That's what we've been trying to do all this time, ignoring the realities in our lives, and then we had to drink over it or drug over it in order to bury this stuff. Yes, dear.
Hi, Jim. I'm Stacy.
Stacy.
Good to see you.
Speak up, honey, so I can hear you.
Good to see you today. I'm glad to be here. I wanted to say that regarding talking about, I've thought about it and trying. I'm on step 4, and I'm just about done with my resentment list.
Yeah. And
my sponsor told me that I should start thinking about forgiving and doing the praying. And I've known about this happening. This is going to take place. And at first, as the book says, I balked about it. And I thought maybe there was an easier, softer way. Could wish those things that happened to me away. I would love to do that, snap my fingers and be done with it. And then I could just be happy, joyous, and free. But the bottom line is it's not going to, I've started to take that necessary step of forgiving other people. And, I find it to be very emotional process. And I realize how strong the third step is, to really leave everything in God's hands and to really go to God. And a given moment that maybe I'm talking to the wall, sometimes I feel more connected than other times. It's not going to be like this white light that's gonna just hit me and I'm gonna be, God knows what. But it's just really neat how you are talking about this today, because I feel like I'm right at the same age.
Well, good. Well, all of these things are applicable and appropriate for us, you see, and whether there's a family involved or not. And one of the things that we certainly have to learn, that we can't hide out from any of this stuff. And even though it may be painful, remember we've talked about this before. Every time you hear the 5th chapter, how it works, being read, listen to that first paragraph, that those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program, usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being what? Honest with themselves. That's the bottom line. That's why this program is not for sissies. People without courage don't make it, because it takes courage to face yourself. But nevertheless, it's absolutely necessary that we do that, because it is only through that we're able to find out what must be changed, so that we can find out what didn't work, and then we can start doing what will work. That make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Name's Lewis, I'm Uncle Lewis. You know, I had to come into this program and have that bankruptcy of a drink not working anymore. You know what I'm saying? Because my problem wasn't my drink, my problem was living. And it took years for me to sit in these chairs and to really accept the truth about myself. You know, I don't know about being constitutionally incapable, but I think a couple of those alcoholic traits of being grandiose and indignant was probably the greatest character defect I had, of me getting down to facing myself. And I love what it says, to years of living as an alcoholic, or that alcoholic internal dynamics of thoughts and behaviors, you know, self-justification, self-centeredness, kept me from really facing, you know, just how neurotic I really was, you know, which kept the message out. And I had to come to another bottom in sobriety, or in abstinence, that was as terrifying and as hopeless as it was when I came in here and I was physically bankrupt, if you know what I'm saying. You know, and that was a process, you know, because I refused to face just how ill my thoughts and attitudes and actions were, just how incompatible with reality, just how delusionary I still wanted to project my thoughts and actions and attitude and control and fix and get others to treat me a certain way, you know, and it just wasn't working. And all I knew was to resort and get lost back in that alcoholic head. And I was still getting the bondage and the beatings and playing the victim role, you know, years into sobriety, you know, and it hurt a lot, you know, and I just wanted to say that.
Okay, did you say that you worked your second step yourself, or what was it? You on your second step?
No.
You're teaching the second step to others? You didn't say anything about the second step?
No. I didn't say anything about the second step. Really, it's like the 9th step. You know, when I thought I was stepping out with a sober, or you know, God's will in my life, and conducting myself as the master would have me, he being the employer, me being the employee, he being the director, me being the actor. You know, I still came up with that fruitless bankruptcy in all my relationships. You know, because I still really didn't get down to the condition, you know, of where I really was at.
When you say bankruptcy in your relationships, what do you mean?
That I was still coming out of interactions with people with resentments and self-pity and feeling that, you know, they should treat me differently. You know, still coming out with a net loss when I interacted with people.
Well, you mean when you were faced with the prospect of making amends to them?
Yes.
That's when this all came up.
Yes.
Because you were saying, they don't deserve amends.
Right.
Look what they did to me.
Yes.
You see, what happened was you never forgave what they did.
Right.
You probably thought you did, but the 9th step is the test to find out whether you got rid of your resentments or not.
Mm-hmm. And it still came in my new, fresh relationships with people.
Yeah, well, so you go back and you take another stab at getting rid of those resentments. You got to pray for the people, but you must forgive the harm they did. Otherwise, it's almost impossible to make amends to them. Because your mind will tell you, no, they don't deserve it. Right?
I would still try to step out in life, manipulate life alcoholically, even in the present. You know, still
well, shame on you. That doesn't work. Got to find a different way of doing stuff. Yes, dear.
I just wanted to say I can totally understand what Louis was sharing about. You know, you asked me what step I was on, and I've only been in the rooms. I came in 4 months clean. I've been in the rooms for the other 14, and like Louis, you know, I wondered why I couldn't get the program even though I stopped drinking, and I'm happy to say that I finally realized it was because, number one, because I couldn't get past step 1. I couldn't really get step 2 and 3. And because of that, I couldn't get any further in the program, and nothing changed. But the good news is I'm now on my 5th sponsor. But this one's working. And it's because I finally realized that in order to, you know, understand anything else in the book, I have to be willing to believe that I'm no longer in control and that I don't run the show. And that was the hardest thing for me to learn. And there's times like today where I still have to remind myself that there's no if, ands, or buts. Always, I'm not the one in control. There's a power greater than me that is in control. And as long as I do that and I surrender to it, my actions become better, and I don't have to explain myself anymore or argue with people. And I found that since I've been doing that, a lot of the resentments that I had for like 6 months in the program went away.
Good. Excellent. Thanks. We have time for one more.
My name is Tammy. I'm an alcoholic addict. And sticking with family afterward, listening to what Stacy was saying, it just brought up that we will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it.
Right.
And what has really worked for me is that if my past can help someone's future, you know, then I don't regret it. And I don't feel like it's, you know, a lock anymore. It's a key. And that's all I wanted to say.
Do you know what the Big Book says about that? That your past is your most valuable possession. You're dead right about that. Okay, anybody need to pick up a chip today? No? Anybody?